All right, welcome to another episode of Let There Be Talk. We have a great guest today. He has a fantastic book out called Tone Chaser. Steve Rosen is my guest today. Let me see if I can show this real quick. There you go, a little floating Eddie.
Yeah.
Um, this is a insane book, and I highly recommend it for not if even if you don't play guitar or whatever, you're just into, learning the deep rabbit holes that Mr. Van Halen went through his whole career. How are you, bud?
I'm doing great, Dean. I'm doing great, man. Great to meet you. And I wanted to say up front, I didn't know that you were a serious musician yourself, man. I was watching some of your stuff, and I was blown away, man. You are a talented dude.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, I don't, I mean, I played music serious, but I don't know how, I was never a level of like Eddie Van Halen. I used the guitar strictly for songwriting tools, but that was what I always said made Eddie Van Halen better than anyone was he could sing, he could write tunes, and he could play guitar. And a lot of people do not have the trifecta. They could either play guitar like crazy, but they're in their room for a lifetime.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
they can write the shit out of songs like a Bob Dylan or anybody that's, a Springsteen. Springsteen can get around the fretboard, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then there's guys that can only sing. So Eddie to me was the ultimate, him and Hendrix, as far as they could do it all. And nowadays, I really put people like, Marcus King, who's a trifecta guy. He can really play, he can sing, and he writes tunes. But Eddie was really of course, the all-time best in 99% of people's ears, unless you're looking at that dumb list of Rolling Stone magazine.
Oh God,
That thing's just atrocious. But
it's ridiculous. It's
one thing
ridiculous.
I wanted to point out, this is a picture of you with Eddie at Day in the Green.
Yeah.
And I know where this is because Day in the Green is absolutely the greatest days of my life as far as concert going. Mr. Bill Graham put on some of the most amazing shows. And this particular day, the bill was insane, and Van Halen was fairly new, and they went on early and completely fucking kicked ass. Do you remember that day?
I remember it very well. That's right, because you were from Northern California guy, right? You were booking a club called the Stone, which I'd heard about. So yeah, man, you would know firsthand about those days on the green that Bill Graham put together. Yeah, man, that was an amazing day. So the lineup is ACDC.
Yep.
I believe it's a band you know a little bit about their Dean.
Yeah.
Opened the show, right? Van Halen was second. Uh, Pat Travers' band was third. Aerosmith and Foreigner. So Foreigner, I think, had just released their second record, and they had all those monster hits, so they were headlining. And I was there actually to interview Mick Jones from Foreigner for Guitar Player magazine. I obviously knew that Van Halen was playing. I had met Edward for the first time about a year earlier, July 77. This is July 78, Day on the Green. I see Edward again for the kind of the second time, and I'm backstage, and he has his own little compound, and we're hanging out and talking a little bit. And this is a perfect time for me to tell you my Bon Scott story.
Yes.
So yes, Van Halen had just come out with their first record, and this was like their first gig sort of on their own away from the tour. They had been opening for Journey, but Journey was kind of giving them short shrift and wasn't giving them sound checks and was treating them like shit. So they had an invitation to come play this Day on the Green, and of course they jumped on it. So yes, they're a pretty new band, but ACDC is a really new band. I think their first record had only just come out, and I'm pretty sure this was their first tour, 78.
78, 77 is the first. They play the whiskey. but
Ah,
78 is Powerade. So I see him
right,
a month later at Dan to Green 5. I believe this is Dan to Green like 2 or something like that because they
right,
did like
right.
5 or 7 a year.
E-
So the bill I
Exactly.
saw was Cheap Trick,
Yeah,
AC/DC, Journey, Blue Oyster Cult, Ted Nugent. So this is right before this.
yeah, exactly. So I'm there. Um, uh, ACDC is on, and their set is over, and I wanted to go out front to watch Van Halen, and as I'm kind of walking out there to watch Van Halen, I get a tap on my shoulder, and it's the publicist for ACDC. And they said, and this was totally, unknown to me. Do you want to come back and interview Angus? Now, I don't want to piss you off or your fans. I was never a huge ACDC fan, okay?
It's
It
fun.
just, right, it wasn't my thing, but I really wanted to go see Van Halen. I thought if I tell her no, she's going to be a little upset. She was a publicist I'd worked with. She had set up a bunch of interviews for me. I said, okay, of course I'm going to go back and interview Angus. So we go back to there's a common area backstage where they have like these picnic tables set up.
I know
So
it.
I'm sitting there, right? Of course, And I'm sitting there at a table with Angus, and we're starting to talk. And again, I hadn't prepared anything, so I'm like ad-libbing. What am I going to talk to Angus Young about? So we're talking. A guy comes over, and he jumps up on the table, man, and he's got a big glass of beer in his hand. I'm looking at him, waiting for Angus to say, "Hey, man, could you not do that?" Thinking it was just somebody backstage, a hanger on, And we're talking a little bit, and the beer is like slopping over the table, and I'm like 3 seconds away from saying, "Dude, could you please leave us the fuck alone? This is Angus Young." He jumps down off the table, sits on the bench next to Angus, and I'm still waiting for Angus to say something. And he goes, "Hi, how you doing, man? I'm Bon Scott." And I thought, oh my God, I almost told Bon Scott to fuck off. But that was pretty funny. Bon was a little drunk that day, but he was a very, very sweet guy, to be honest with you. But yeah, that was pretty amazing. That was a pretty amazing day. Those shows. And then if you really go back earlier, and again, all this stuff, Dean, all those amazing shows that Bill Graham was putting on at the Fillmores, and he'd have Kaleidoscope opening for Steve Miller, opening for Jefferson Airplane. God, those were just amazing. Those kinds of days and those shows.
So did you get to see Van Halen or did it last the interview the
No,
whole time?
no. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. That's the punchline. No, so literally, as I'm interviewing them, I can hear Van Halen play because the front of the stage is only, I don't know, a couple of 100 yards, but I can hear them playing. And in fact, when I went back to listen to that tape that I had made of Angus and Bond, faintly you can hear Van Halen playing. So no, I never did see Van Halen play that day. Um, but
I'll
yeah,
tell you,
pretty amazing.
I've seen Van Halen every tour from Women to Children on. I saw the 3 nights in Oakland with the Fair Warning. I got an Oakland scarf. I saw the Women and Children. I saw the 84. I saw the US Festival. I saw Van Halen at the mightiest.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's interesting to really think about the book called Chasers because his tone did evolve over the years. Um, for me, I think the greatest tone for him was probably Fair Warning era. Now, that tone and the intensity of the playing, and I had talked to somebody a couple years ago on the show. I can't remember who it was. And I had heard through the years that Fair Warning was an answer, Eddie Van Halen, to Randy Rhoads. And people went crazy on this interview, like, that's bullshit. He's never said that. But the word that I heard was Randy was getting a lot of accolades right around then and 81. And Eddie was like, "Oh yeah, because the plane is way more fierce and dark and radical than he ever did again." Now, did he ever comment on that?
yeah. No, he really did. I've never heard that that posited about him as a response to Randy. you know, I mean, way in the back of his head, was there a sense of that? Maybe. I don't think Edward worked off triggers like that, you know. It's funny because I talk about fair warning a fair bit in the book, in Tone Chaser, and we talk about fair warning. I had made the comment to him. I go, man, you really sound like an angry young man on the album, you know, and he kind of laughs, you know. I think that darkness came from a place where I think it was a couple things. It was the first time he really had more time to develop his guitar parts, right? So that's really the first record where we hear Edward Van Halen as a real composer and an orchestrator, right? So you're hearing all those amazing rhythm parts, you know, and his harmonic sense, and those remarkable solos, as you've talked about. And the tone is just, I think I might agree with you, Dean. I think his tone is amazing. I think maybe it's the best playing he ever did. But I think it was, there was some pressure on him. Those earlier records had done pretty amazing. And with Edward, it was always, and he talks about this, it was always, and the band would say, so Eddie, what do you got now, man? What are we going to play, you know? And it was like, nobody else in the band wrote, as you touched on earlier. He was the sole songwriter. David Lee Roth obviously wrote melodies and lyrics, but that was after the fact, right? That was after the music was done. Edward would hand him the track, and Dave would essentially write lyrics and melodies. So I think there was some pressure on Edward, and in fact, so much so that he got really sick during that period. He had a horrible ulcer. I mean, a really, really bad ulcer. He was losing weight. There were sleepless nights. But at the end of the day, I mean, we hear what he came up with, and it's incredible. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the way that he put those guitar parts together, and Edward tended to hear everything sort of in advance. He knew kind of, harmonically the chords and the little sus chords and little connecting tissue that was going to go in there, what the solo was going to sound like over those changes. So that was pretty amazing. Remarkable record.
There's a lot of amazing things about Eddie. Of course, the striped guitars and everything. I try to follow the path of the black and white guitar. So the first one is the black and white guitar, and that becomes Frankenstein. Am I correct?
I don't know if that becomes Frankenstrat or
I know
it becomes the Bumblebee guitar.
Right, you got Bumblebee guitar, and I don't really remember if he paints the black and white into the Bumblebee, and then because then it's supposedly the Bumblebee went into Dimebag's into his coffin.
Right.
I think with Eddie, once he was up and running, he probably had like a couple Bumblebees or but he had a bunch of bodies, because recently I had no idea, and I knew all about Dweezil Zappa having the Rasta guitar, but I had no idea because I saw Eddie play the Rasta guitar, and I also saw him play the Crop Circles guitar from the Fair Warning tour. I didn't know that the Rasta was the Crop Circle.
Became the Crop Circle.
Now the Crop Circle went to Rasta.
Right. There's another story behind that. Dweezil, Dweezil had that guitar, right, and Edward kind of wanted it back. And Dweezil, I don't want to get into it. I don't know specifics. Dweezil's a sweet guy, great guitar player, obviously a monster Van Halen fan. I think you really hit on it, Dean. I think Edward probably had lots of guitars lying around, and guys were able to pick out specific guitars. Each paint job was a little different. I mean, maybe. I honestly, in Edward's mind, I don't think he ever kept track of any of that. For him, it was just another tool. And you mentioned earlier, Dean, about Edward being sort of that multiple threat songwriter, singer, and he was a good singer. Back in the early days, way pre. He was singing lead. Yeah. He was singing like Who songs. He had, Adultery down. So he was a singer, songwriter, guitar player, guitar builder. Guitar Innovator, all the things, the flip up thing. But yeah, and again, in my mind, if he had done nothing more than just sort of built that guitar from nothing, and if he had never played the guitar, that would have been enough. To me, that's extraordinary. And in the book, I write, I was trying to think of what guitar players not only built their own instruments, but played them, right? So I'm not talking about a Slash signature model that Gibson puts out, but I'm talking about a guitar that the guitar player built that he plays. I can think of Edward, Les Paul, and Brian May. That's
Yep.
it. I mean, name me another one. I can't think of any, right?
Yeah.
So that is and and for the guitar to sound like that, and for him to be able to play those guitars, it's like, what comes first, the egg or the chicken? It's like, did he hear the brown sound in his head and he built this guitar? He thought, oh, it needs to have a humbucker, one pickup on a Strat, or did he build a guitar and that sort of informed the kind of sound he was going to go after? Pretty amazing,
My favorite Guitar Player magazine cover of all time is him with the snake guitar that was kind of carved into a snake.
Yeah.
But I was obsessed with Eddie's guitars, not because of tone or anything, but I'm a freak for design and architecture and art. And these guitars became fucking art to me, man. And there's so many, you get into the Kramer, the Ripley stereo model, with the fucking knobs and stuff. You get into the all-time coolest women and children Ibanez Destroyer, where he cuts it and then puts the things in because it's starting to split. I mean, everything about this guy when you're looking at it, and then of course the early days of the Marshall and getting the dimmer switch and the things catching on fire. Everything, I mean, everything about it is just awesome,
It was, and again with Edward, really, what I recognize and I believe is true is that really it was all sort of, and he talks about falling down the stairs and landing on your feet. I believe that was his approach to guitar playing. Hey, why can't I do this as a tapping thing, and why can't I put a humbucker right against the body of a guitar? Why do I have to reset? I think it was all kind of an organic approach. Now, that being said, he had some internal mechanism where intuitively he understood things. I mean, he had that luthier thing going on. He understood how to attach a neck to a body and how to keep it in tune and how to put in frets. And after melting, guitar pickups, and trying to pot them and they would melt. I mean, he understood all of that stuff. But I really think he was just kind of winging it. I don't think he ever had a sense of, oh, I'm going to do this to create that, which makes him all the more amazing, and you bring up the Kramers, and then there are the PVs and the Music Mans. And look, I know those are all great guitars. For me, and I was there the night Edward was deciding whether he should sort of become an endorsee for Kramer. Every instinct in me said, do not do it. Don't do it. Why would you do it? Why would you put your name on the guitar? Go to Kramer, tell them you want 10 guitars built of these specs, and they'll fall over themselves building it. I thought it took away from his mystique, right? That DIY, the kid in the garage with the hammer and a chisel. Again, not taking anything away from the guitars. He was playing them. Obviously, they were great instruments. But I don't think he had a sense of that either. I don't think he ever had a sense of his own legacy of being a guitar hero. It was just kind of one foot in front of the other. He was very self-assured of himself, of being a very good guitar player, that he was building these instruments, but it was never like, oh man, check out the guitar I built, or oh, I'm the greatest guitar player. But I thought that was a mistake, him kind of endorsing those instruments. That's me. Those are my feelings, So
Let's get into it. You're writing for Guitar Player magazine in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And at what point do you meet Eddie? They ask you to do a story on him. And then how does it go from that into a long friendship and all these cassette tapes that you have of the interviews and all that? Because we do know about the one guy that emailed Eddie one night, and then Eddie emailed him like a year later out of nowhere, and it became a long email, friendship. But how does your thing happen?
Right. And again, not to discount that, that was a 3 month, and I get it, that was a 3 month friendship. Mine lasted 26 years. But that being said, so yes, so it's a 77. I had been writing for Guitar Player magazine for about 4 years at that point. So I had interviewed a bunch of heavy guys, I had
Paid?
interviewed Blackmore and Jimmy Page, uh, uh, Ronnie Wood, Pete Townsend, Joe Walsh, Jeff Beck. I had done a lot of heavy lifting. I'm at the Whiskey, July 77, and Cheap Trick is recording a live record. Not the Budokan record, of course. They would record that in 78 when they would blow up. But in 77, they were still playing the Whiskey in front of 200 people, right? So this was like a promotional record label thing. Hey, let's go in, have you play a weekend at the Whiskey, let's record a live record. So I'm there, and my friend Michelle Meyer booked the club. I knew Michelle because I had some bands back in the day, and she very kindly booked my band into some of the outlying clubs. She says, "Hey, listen, there's somebody you need to meet." So we go upstairs at the Whiskey to the dressing room, and the dressing rooms at the Whiskey are like the bottom of an ashtray. They reek of cigarettes. There's used stuff on the floor and empty beer cans and stuff. And I see this guy standing in the corner. So again, this is July 77. The first album is still about 8 months away.
Wow.
Van Halen was, they were a Hollywood phenom at that point, right? They were playing the Whiskey. They were headlining the Whiskey. They sort of risen from the ranks, going from like the Starwood to Gazzarri's to the Whiskey. But they were still kind of a regional band at best. So I'm introduced to him, and we just kind of start talking. And I don't know how we got on the subject. And that's a conversation I wish I had recorded. You wish. But, who knew? So we start talking, and somehow Eric Clapton comes up. And I was a big Clapton fan. I love Clapton with Cream. I thought he was amazing. Edward, turns out, is a huge Clapton fan. So we sort of bond over Clapton. We start talking about Jeff Beck. We talk about Blackmore, and I love all those guitar players. And he was fans of those guitar players. And so we're talking, and again, I can't remember if it was a half hour, an hour. He runs out of the room, and what the hell, and he kind of comes back, and he's got a pen in his hand. He picks up a scrap of paper off the floor, and he's writing something. He hands it to me, and it's his phone number. He goes, "Hey, man, I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope we meet again. Give me a call." The next time I meet him is a year later at the Day on the Green. I never could call him. I could never bring myself to do it. A regret. I should have done it. In the meantime, that first record comes out February 78. And this is the truth. Everybody said, "Man, you've got to hear this guitar player. He's going to blow you away." I get the record in the mail from Warner's. I put it on, and I'm underwhelmed. I don't think it's very good.
Whoa.
I didn't know what everybody was talking about. I go, this is kind of like poor man's Deep Purple, kind of fast shuffles, and I thought to myself, look, everybody on the planet is saying this guy and this band are amazing. Rosen, you're missing something. So the next day I sat down, big cup of coffee, and sat down and listened carefully, top to bottom. I go, oh, that's what everybody's talking about. I got it. So in answer to your question, Dean, the relationship, and people have asked, well, when do you think you became friends? Really, if I think about it, I think we became friends that first night at the Whiskey. When you meet someone, when do you become a friend? it's like the drops of water in a glass of water, and that one drop makes it overflow, and you don't know which drop that is. And I think it was because I didn't know that this was Edward Van Halen from Van Halen. They hadn't gone out on tour yet, right? So I kind of knew him still as a guy coming out of the clubs. Now his band did have a deal on Warner Brothers, which I thought was, oh my God, unbelievable. But beyond that, I didn't really know too much. So I think the foundation was there. He wasn't sort of a guitar god yet. And I think it was just a lot of, I know it was just a lot of respect and trust. And he trusted me, and he told me things, and it was just amazing. And we just would meet over and over, and he lived about 10 minutes from the house, and he would come over to the pad, and he'd hang out, and he'd light up a cigarette, and we'd do drugs, man. And
Yeah.
I got to tell you, it was fun, so it was amazing. The relationship would change. Around the early 90s, I could sense a change in him. And I wasn't sure where that came from. I tried to answer that in the book. He wasn't this same loving, generous person I knew from back in the day. So, maybe fame has its price as well. I don't know, but it was amazing. I mean, he was amazing for sure.
I think the interesting thing about Eddie is it's totally you know, the prime example of having ultimate tone and still tweaking on it to where you start to go away from ultimate tone. And once it gets to the Sammy Hagar era, I truly believe that the tone is it's not good. It's compressed. It sounds like a bzee, bzee, bzee. It almost sounds like that drill on the beginning of Pound Cake. You know, it was really weird to me because this guy had this beautiful, warm, quote unquote, brown sound, and then it just became smaller and smaller. Did he ever get into the like what he was trying to do with that tone, or was he just bored with the old Eddie?
Well, there's a quote in my book, which is where I got the title from. It was literally the last interview I ever did with him, and I don't know how it came up. I can't remember what we were talking about, but he brings up. He goes, "Hey, man, I'm a tone chaser. I'm always looking for that elusive sound." And I said to myself, I go, "Have you found it?" This is 2003. I go, "Have you ever found it?" And he goes, "No." Wow. But I know exactly what you're saying. I kind of liken it to, you see some of these, and I'm not going to say anybody specific, these incredible looking like actors and actresses who were so beautiful. And then they go and they get some stuff done. And it's like, what are you thinking, And no, I never had that specific conversation about Edward, man. Your tone on 5150 is so removed, even from the 1984 record.
Right.
And there's still that, right? There's still that brown sound is inherent in the 1984 guitar tone, right?
Like House of Pain,
Exactly. I think a lot of it had to do with you now have different producers coming in.
Mick Jones,
right?
That's what I think.
Right, Mick Jones, and then you had Bruce Fairbairn, who's an amazing producer, but he wasn't. I think Ted came in. I think Ted was kind of hands off in terms of the actual tone of the guitar. I think all of that was Don Landy, and yes, and Don, had a huge part in that sound, and Mike Frazier, who was an extraordinary producer. But I think that their approach was different. And maybe Edward was searching for something different, Sammy brings in a different, tonality to the voice. Maybe he was looking for a different tone to complement Sammy's voice. I don't know. I do know what you're saying. The sound, it is more processed. It's less raw.
It's like
I mean, I agree with you, man.
it's kind of more Rockman than Amplifier, you know. But that was, also the trend that was going on. You look at Hysteria, they're using Rockmans. There's a lot of compressed stuff. All of a sudden, everybody's chasing like digital tones. And early digital was really wacky. And then people are, some people aren't recording on tape anymore. And then there's the quote unquote radio mixes and all of that stuff. So it could be a total combo because you're looking at Ted Templeman, who did Montrose, uh, you know, and Foreigner Four, and it's he's a '70s big rock guy,
Yeah.
not big in a way of like big '80s with reverbs and everything, but big as far as beautiful tones, organic drums, 2-inch tape, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it really and I get it, with Eddie. It's like with me with jokes. You got these great jokes that work, but you've got to constantly try to push yourself and
Right.
find the new jokes, and they don't always work.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Really interesting. I love the jokes analogy. That's great. Ted's relationship with Edward was really funny. Ted provided this. I don't know what it was. Obviously, his in quotes as a producer, but somehow Ted was important to Edward as I don't know what it was, sounding board. I'm not sure what it was because I mean there are moments in the book we're talking about Ted and Edward was not happy with Ted. Ted would sometimes insult Edward, and maybe discount Edward's musicality and stuff. And then there's a couple records go by and Ted's not involved, and then Edward brings Ted back. So yeah, Ted was critical. Yeah, I think Edward, yeah, man, was just maybe looking for something new. And then I mean, if we fast forward to the different kind of truth record, you hear some of the tracks that had been recorded much earlier. So
Right.
you hear a little bit of that Brown sound thing still there. But that record, I don't know, for me.
That record sounds awful. But there's some great tunes on it. But that
Yeah.
is kind of the peak of like digital crunch of like and let me get this straight. At any time that we have a person listening to this show, I'm only talking about what I feel. And people go, "Oh, fuck you." I love Van Halen more than probably most. I grew up on it. I saw it. It's in my blood. And that makes you question stuff about guys. And like I said, at the end of the day, I've never reached any kind of level of Eddie Van Halen or whatever. I'm just trying to get behind the scenes of like what happened here or there. But that record had some great songs on it, which was really kind of cool. And that was an interesting tour because I went to the LA Forum Friends and Family rehearsal. It was amazing to see those guys back together and everything. And I felt like his tone was back, he
Yeah.
he was really he had the the actual amplifier tube amps, those 5150s or whatever amps he was using, and they
Yeah.
sounded great. And I do like his later Eddie Van Halen guitars, because I know early on he was a Les Paul. He liked Les Paul shape and stuff, but then he got away from it. He even had that 59. That's that great story where he uh he calls up Norm and says, "Hey man, you changed the pickup on this." And he goes, "No, I didn't. It was all original." And he goes, "No, no, you changed the neck one." And he goes, "Well, you took it out, so somebody switched it out." He goes, "I never took it out." And then there's the photos of him playing with no neck pickup, and he's like, "Oh, I guess I did." That's awesome. But yeah, man, it's I feel like we just got so lucky in life to be able to see Eddie Van Halen, uh, you know, for his entire career. that's gold to me, from 78 on.
Yeah. No. He was. You touched the outset of our conversation, Dean. You bring up Jimi Hendrix. If we're talking about true movers and shakers of guitar, I mean, that's a small club. Jimi Hendrix, Edward. Look, obviously you could expand that to people like Clapton and Page and Jeff Beck. I would actually put Jeff Beck in there. But yeah, on that level, where they changed the whole face and the whole character of guitar playing. And yes, we were lucky to have been there. I loved sort of that era of sort of electric guitar, English guitar players, sort of like the mid '60s thing. I was young back then, so I wasn't able to see sort of the early days of Jeff Beck and Clapton and that kind of thing. But yeah, being able to kind of watch Edward from kind of start to finish, we were lucky, because there will never be, that's our question. Will there be another Van Halen? I think it's impossible. And especially in this digital age, where everything is made available to you, but because there's so much music available online, some incredible guitar player might be so far down that rabbit hole that he's never going to see the light. You know what I mean? That's sort of the downside of the internet. But Edward changed the game, and when I was around him, and sort of after hearing the first record and watching him go out on the road, and him sort of by the end of that first tour blowing Journey off, and just the rise of his star. I knew, maybe everybody else in the world did too, but I knew that I was in the presence of a future legend. I mean, it wasn't lost on me. And then even though we were hanging out and I was his friend, a second never went by where in the back of my brain it didn't say, dude, you're sitting there with Eddie Van Halen. This guy's fucking changing the whole world. I was aware of that, which is a difficult tightrope to walk at moments. And I write about that in the book. But yeah, unbelievable.
I was lucky enough to see Women and Children tour, which is, I think Women and Children, fair warning, like I said, are the peak Van Halen, because Dave's still singing and he doesn't turn into that kind of party guy where he's not singing the lyrics. And you're talking about a radical, violent, no one can fucking top this performance. And then once we get to Diver Down, it's a lot of the look at all the people here tonight and I'm gonna fuck your girlfriend. And then we get into 84 and it's a full circus. But to see Van Halen, and I can tell you this right now, I've seen a couple thousand shows. When they would come on, like and open with On Fire, you just couldn't even believe what the fuck was going on. It was so violent and radical and so original that it still sticks in my brain all the time, man. When I hear like On Fire or Atomic Punk, because a couple tours they would open with those two, it was just unbelievable what I was seeing and hearing. And it was four guys firing on all cylinders. It's insane, actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you bring up Dave and you think about those four guys, and it was like the Beatles. You replace one of those guys, it doesn't work. The fact that they did replace the singer and have Sammy come in and have that success is pretty extraordinary. In fact, I was thinking about that. How many bands have replaced the lead singer and found that success? And AC/DC, comes to mind. But that's a pretty rare.
Yeah, Chicago. It's really rare,
Yeah, Chicago, right. There's probably a couple of the bands. Sabbath, maybe sort of, but
Man, but the Dio era Sabbath is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
reminds me of a story. Um, I went to go see Heaven and Hell at the Greek, and Eddie was there. And so I am standing back and I overhear him talking to Tony Iommi. And this is the last Heaven and Hell show, the last era right there before, Ronnie passes. I hear him. He goes, I just got back from Germany. And Tony's like, oh, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I got stem cell. My hands, they're like 13 years old again. I could just create. And he's telling him about it. And I'm like, this is the first time I heard of stem cell. And, last year I got stem cell in my neck. And I never forgot that.
Wow. Unbelievable.
It's,
Yeah. I mean, they were,
it's crazy.
yeah. Yeah. He was a huge Sabbath fan, obviously.
Of
Um,
course. Yeah,
and then,
sure.
right. Right. And then opening for Sabbath, and then blowing them off. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And then that triggers Ozzy. Oh, I got to go find a guitar player. And Randy Rhodes enters the picture. But yeah, so Van Halen, beyond Edward, being this remarkable musician, they found that template, right, for what would become kind of modern rock, really. I mean, there were some other bands, I mean, sort of doing the thing. I mean, not like that. Aerosmith had already come out. And there were a couple of the bands, ZZ Top, but yeah, that formula, for modern rock, singer, fronting a trio. I mean, they were kind of it, which isn't to say that there weren't sort of internal problems from the very beginning. And it's a kind of a nod at Edward's ability to sort of navigate the storm, as it were. Because, I mean, he and Dave were never friends. And not that band members have to be friends. I mean, so many, the Beatles weren't friends. Zeppelin weren't friends. They didn't hang out when they weren't on stage. But, at a point in time, it gets to a point where it can't be sort of fixed anymore. But Edward was aware of that. My God, he wanted to get Dave out of the band after the second record. He wasn't going to do that. He realized that, my God, I do that, it's over, But
Ed Templeman wanted Sammy on the first record.
Right.
Let me ask you,
Yeah.
you go to the S Festival? Because I did.
I was there. And again, as you sort of put out your little your qualifier here, I don't want to piss anybody off.
Oh.
I spent 14 months of my fucking life writing the book.
Right.
Not knowing if, so I love the guy. I would have taken a bullet for him. I thought the band were horrible there. Now, I thought Edward played great. I thought the band was horrendous. Dave, it was an embarrassment. My feelings.
I've been saying this my entire life. It was awful. And they fixed it or something, because when you watch the videos now, you go, yeah, this is pretty good. They obviously did some tweaking on it. But man, that night was one of the biggest train wrecks I've ever seen in rock history. And it was wild that not a lot of people talk about it. And I do talk about it. And like I said, I fucking love the band. And, they're going to have some bad nights. But that one was in front of a lot of people. And and you are the first person I've heard that said the same thing.
Oh God, I'm so glad you brought that up. So when they burn us in effigy, Dean, they're coming for both of us. So misery loves company, pal. No, but I think people understand where we're coming from. I wrote about the Yes Festival at length in my book, and the title of the chapter, I thought it was so clever, is more us than them. I thought very clever, But and I mentioned to Edward, I go, Edward, you played great. And he goes, yeah, I thought so. And again, he would never say things like that. But I didn't go on to say Dave was fucking horrible. I wouldn't go there. But I think the fact that he said, Yeah, I think so. Referring to himself playing great, I think he was, not saying yeah because Dave and was horrible. Um, and you wonder why, because right, that's when they're famously paid uh, $1.5 million, and
Right.
you say, yeah, now I've got to live that down because good, bad, or indifferent, Van Halen still had that sense of hey, it's just a band who came from playing backyard parties, and now that they're filling stadiums, they're still sort of your next door neighbor, right? He's your good buddy. He says now people are saying, oh, you got paid all that money and this and that, and then you talked about it. You touched on it earlier about now they had to go through all of these TV mixes and stereo mixes and he goes, yeah, man, it's like for months we were, having to do mixes and people don't realize we rehearsed for that one show like we would an entire tour. Yeah, I get it. Still, $1.5 million is a pretty good day's pay. But yeah, I mean, was Dave like incredibly nervous? Did he think he could get so fucked up that it wouldn't matter? Um, I don't know. I think Edward was just more aware of the importance of the show, and hence him bringing sort of the A game. You know, but it was amazing. They were atrocious, and on top of that, you have to wade through an entire day of heavy metal, and I was so fucking fried. And then I don't know, maybe you had these great seats. If I remember, I thought the press seats were sort of in back of the stage, and I couldn't really see, or so I was like, I was done with anyway. So
Well, I tell you, when you look at it, your reputation is the party band, and sometimes the partying is real and it backfires. And sometimes it's an act and the audience is it, the Jack Daniels bit, the, smoking weed, someone threw a joint up, or, we've been partying for weeks on this tour, whatever. But the bottom line is it did zero to hurt them and more stratospheric, even more coming with the 84 tour because all anybody remembers at the end of the day was how massive it was. And it was the day that changed rock, metal in the history and the eyes of the industry. Because all of a sudden they were like, holy shit, get out and sign 700 Van Halen wannabes immediately, and that becomes the hair metal era of the 80s.
yeah, you're right. Excellent point. Excellent point, man. Yeah, you're right. There was like no fallout whatsoever. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I guess you're that big. You're that legendary. I mean, yeah.
Also,
What?
the
What?
audience was so fucked up that
Yeah,
they just remember it how they want it. They're like, it was amazing.
I know. I know. And it's funny, and you probably have sensed the same thing. So before I started writing, which is probably about 72, I went to a lot of concerts. I was buying concert tickets. I love the whole process. You'd go down to the Forum, you go down to the Santa Monica Civic, and you pay your $6.50 to go get tickets to go see Mountain or King Crimson, whoever it was. I love the experience. Every concert was so special, and seeing the ads in the papers, and you know you become a music journalist, and you're now given free tickets, which is amazing, and you get to hang out with bands and you get to hang out backstage. And that was all incredible, and to be honest, I would have done it for free, right? I mean, I would have paid you to have gone and done that. But what happens a little bit, you know, is some of the luster goes away just a little bit. So you're able to, you and I maybe, because you've been to a lot of shows, you can look at that US Festival and go, in the canon of Van Halen shows, that's not very good. Whereas if you're a fan, and I get it, and maybe that's a good thing. If you're a fan and that's your first show, your second show, or maybe your 10th show, you go, oh my God, I was there. And there was, so it's a weird dichotomy. If you work at a drugstore, maybe the last thing you want to do is get high. If you work in an ice cream parlor, you don't want another ice cream cone. I don't know. It's a strange phenomena, but you know,
you're right. A lot of people, that might have been their first time seeing Van Halen, and
yeah,
they love the party atmosphere. And I've actually heard people go, "Man, Dave was so fucked up. It was awesome." And
exactly.
that's fucking great. I'm just saying, when you've seen Van Halen on the Women and Children tour and the Fair Warning tour and even the Diver Down tour, when Dave gets even a little, circusy, uh,
Yeah,
and and that, we know that the US Festival, then that turns into the 80, the Diver Down era,
yeah.
because they do Pretty Woman as the single, and then they have to go do the record. But if you've seen that band, especially on the Fair Warning tour, when you see something so fucking radical, it's a game changer, man, and it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, absolutely. And which kind of brings up an interesting point because I know you kind of looked at me askance when I mentioned that I didn't think the first Van Halen record was very good the first time I heard it. And as I'm writing that in the book, I'm writing that, I'm going, well, come on, man, why are you saying that? There's got to be a reason. Because I didn't manufacture that feeling. I didn't purposely say, oh, I don't like this record. I really was underwhelmed by it. And I thought about it. So for me, those high water marks were sort of, again, I was listening to guitar players like Jeff Beck, on the first Jeff Beck, the Truth and the Beckola records with Rod Stewart singing. And I saw that tour. I was young. I was 69. I was 16 years old, or Robin Trower, with Procol Harum, or Paul Kossoff with Free,
Oh,
David Gilmour, Martin Barr with Tall. I mean, those are the kinds of guitar. Jimmy Page, of course. Hendrix, the first Hendrix record. It was like, oh my God. So in my head, that was where the bar was set. So when I hear Van Halen, man, I set that bar so fucking high, and not consciously. It's just that's where it was. So it just wasn't on that radar. When I went back and listened to it again, I got it. I understood it. And it's what you're saying. Yeah, I had this high bar, and it didn't register. Had that been the 10th record I'd ever heard in my life, or yeah, I would have been flabbergasted by it. But yeah, interesting.
the book's called Tone Chaser. This is Steve Rosen, and it's out now. Where can you get the book?
You can find the book on my website. Very simple, tonechaserbook.com, one word, tonechaserbook.com. Or if you're so inclined, you can go find it on Amazon. You can find it on eBay. And
Is
if you're out there
audio
buying, I'm sorry?
audio version?
I do have an audio version. You can find the audio version on my website as well. And quickly, what's cool about the audio version? So I do the narration, but all of the interviews with Edward that you'll read in the hardback, I have actually utilized the actual original audio I recorded with Edward dating back to 78.
Oh, you
So
got to
you're
bring that
hearing
to me.
it's like 25 hours of audio interviews with Edward. There are little bits and pieces of him noodling. There's stuff where he's playing like the riffs,
Oh,
not plugged in, of the second and third records.
oh,
You mentioned the Les Pauls. When he bought those two Les Pauls, he brought them over to my pad literally minutes after he bought them. There's 15 seconds of Edward cranking my Marshall 100-watt stack with one of the Les Pauls. And
oh.
that to me is worth the price of admission. So if you're not a reader, go check out the audiobooks.
Send that over to me, will you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. Positively. You'll
Thanks
love
for
this.
doing the show, brother. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Dean. You take care, pal.
Everybody get this book. It's fantastic. And oh man, like I said, I'll celebrate Eddie Van Halen until I die. The guy is just a god. Thank you so much.
Cool, man.
See
See
you,
you, pal.